labs and offices at SRI, one of the most frequent things you'll hear is, "I didn't know SRI invented that." Every day, each of us benefits from the outcomes of SRI inventions. The internet, the computer mouse, new approaches to education, the 911 emergency call system, and even the rollout of color television. We can't quite predict the future, but we're already working on the next wave of innovations that will improve our lives at work, at home, at school, and in our communities. In education, we're advancing new technologies that will transform learning, creating AI-driven tools that empower students from all backgrounds to learn and grow. In health, we're advancing our understanding of sleep, menopause, and teen mental health while exploring new gene therapies and precision medicine. We know that quantum technologies will redefine our world, so we're building tiny sensors that will solve big challenges. In AI, we're developing systems that can enhance decision-making, ensure safety, and revolutionize industries. Our work in security is essential to defending against cyber attacks and national security risks. In climate, we're developing sustainable technologies and new materials that will address climate change and protect our planet. And when it comes to space, we're looking to the stars, contributing technologies to explore new planets, track space debris, monitor weather patterns, and ensure sustainable space exploration. At SRI, we don't just predict the future, we build it. Join us on our mission to deliver world-changing solutions for a safer, healthier, and more sustainable future.
Those of you who are here in the room, welcome. Those of you who are online, welcome to you as well. We have 2 overflow rooms set up, and we're happy if there are people up there too. Welcome to you as well. We hope you enjoyed these 2 trailers for what promises to be a terrific conversation with the leaders of two of Silicon Valley's innovation engines, along with the individual who has helped tell the extraordinary stories of these storied organizations for many, many years. I want to thank X, the Moonshot Factory, for collaborating with us on this event, as well as their team and our team here at SRI for bringing this event to life. Parc Forum was established in 1977. And by the way, there are chairs up in front if you want to sit with me. I'm happy to have you there. Parc Forum was established in 1977 as Parc's invited speaker series and public platform for exchanging insights and for building relationships with leading experts in a number of areas. Speakers have included Nobel Prize and Turing Award winners, CEOs, journalists, and other leading thinkers on a wide variety of subjects. The program was put on hiatus in 2019, and when SRI acquired Parc as a donation from Xerox in 2023, we relaunched it as a way to bring together some of the world's most interesting people for conversations at the intersection of business, technology, and society. And we do hope this is a conversation. When you came in, you were each handed a card that had a SRI, that's not one of them, an SRI innovation on the back. We hope, and an SRI pencil, and we hope if you have a question, you will write it down on the question, and we'll have people coming through periodically to collect those, and I will help moderate that part of the question answer. The other part, and this is for those of you who have been to Parc Forum before, this is a new thing that we're trying out. We have a video booth upstairs, and we are inviting all of you to join the conversation at a reception after the event, and we'd like to hear from you about the one technology or innovation that you would like to see created in the next 25 years to help us build a safer, healthier, and more sustainable future. So hopefully you will all participate, or many of you will participate in that. 2 housekeeping notes before we begin. First, in the unlikely event of a natural emergency, please leave through the doors that you came in through, and then go up the stairs, and then we're going to kind of collect ourselves up and to the right, and this will allow any kind of emergency vehicles, or not vehicles, individuals come through on the other side of the staircase. Second, at the end of the event, we are going to close and lock the doors, so please gather your belongings and take them with you. It'll be harder to get them afterward. I'll remind you about that later at the end. So now I'm very pleased to introduce John Markoff, a Palo Alto native and one of technology journalism's most influential voices. He is a longtime reporter for the New York Times. He's the author of several books. He earned a Pulitzer Prize currently a visiting scholar at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford, where he is working on a prehistory of Silicon Valley. Please join me in welcoming John Markoff.
Everybody else in here. So tonight we're going to talk about the future, and my guests are down. Sorry. Is it on? Yes. Is this better? Okay. David Parekh is the chief executive at SRI. He's a mechanical engineer, and he has worked at Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, United Technologies, and Georgia Tech. David, come on over. Astro Teller is CEO and co-founder at Google X. He's a computer scientist and the author of several novels, including Exegesis, which was published in 1997. And it's a great counterexample to my contention that the visionaries are always wrong. We'll get into that. Astro? There you are. I found out before we started that David and Astro crossed paths as one left Stanford and one came to Stanford. So they're both Stanford alums. So tonight we're going to look at where the Valley is going next. I think we've got to start when you do something like that by tipping your hat to Yogi Berra. It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future, but that's what we're going to try to do tonight. And as long as we're talking about those kinds of dictums, we should mention my friend Paul Sappho, who was famous for having said, never mistake a clear view for a short distance, which is also known as Amura's Law, which takes us back to SRI. Roy Amura was started as an SRI researcher, and he's the one who said, we tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And as long as we're at Parc, we should go ahead and mention Alan Kay, who, of course, said the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And he, of course, invented the Dynabook, which drove many generations of Silicon Valley innovation. And Alan also said, point of view is worth 80 IQ points. And so hopefully we'll get some point of view this evening. I want to start, we're going to go forward, but I want to start, we're going a little bit backwards. It's been fashionable recently to say Silicon Valley is either almost dead or going to be dead. It clearly is not true. There was a point where people were going to Austin, they were going to Miami, and now many of them are coming back. Valley is clearly spun up again. I wanted to, when you guys, Astro and Sebastian Thrun were the co-founders of X at Google. And when Sebastian was starting X, he held out Parc to me as a potential model for what X would be. And I wanted to know, did you guys borrow from X in terms of their approach? And if you started that way, have you changed? Where are you different or similar to the way Parc was in the 70s?
So to be clear, I'm going to answer the question, and I'm going to answer it honestly. And I want to start with sincere and great respect, but most of what we took from Parc was what not to do. Sorry, I'm missing that part of my brain that causes me to be diplomatic. Look, Bell Labs was in a very special place where they had exceptional people, but they were looking over the fence at this incredibly target-rich environment, which was Western Electric. So they were solving a set of problems that were like really palpable and like right there. Xerox PARC didn't mostly have that, so they had to go find some new problems, essentially. They had incredible people. X would be lucky in its entire history to change the world as much as PARC did. But because there wasn't what I think of as a conveyor belt, PARC was not set up with a clear mandate and incentives to go all the way from crazy ideas to enduring businesses. They came up with those great ideas, but they mostly didn't find a really systematized way to harvest them. That was my takeaway in particular. So one of the things that we said at X is we would be lucky to be as impactful in the world as Bell Labs was, But that's not exactly a model for us because they weren't an intellectual property shop. All their intellectual property was available to the world from the beginning. That was part of their deal with the US government. Parc, we'd be lucky to have as much impact in the world as Parc did, but we think that we can be more focused and more clear with our people about the conveyor belt nature of how we want things to move through the process from crazy ideas to enduring businesses to improve our hit rate and to create more efficiency.
Yeah. David, you now have Parc, but that was never really SRI's structure. What have you taken? What part of Parc have you taken internalized into SRI?
Well, the thing we love about Parc and the researchers here is the way in which they collaborate. So they're not coming in saying, okay, I want to invent this thing, but they're engaging with folks saying, well, what's your need? And in that, it's really easy to self-assemble people with expertise from quantum to chemistry to AI. And so I think there's the magic of that there. And I think, certainly it's interesting, as you read the history of organizations like Parc, you can have Fumbling the Future or Dealers for Lightning, right? You can have different perspectives and views. And I think the thing that's interesting is so much innovation happened that no one company could commercialize it. And it did, in fact, have an impact on the company that it belonged to that was very successful in print and things of that fashion. And it's an interesting question for us on how you do that. So for SRI, it doesn't have a company it's attached to. So it sees its sort of world as the whole valley and the rest of the world. Yeah. So the innovation that's there is meant to be brought out. And so we've really enjoyed as we brought the two organizations together to sort of bring that sense of innovation that Parc has and how they connect, and SRI's connection to customers and needs driving innovation.
So we're at this interesting juncture. I think the consensus is that over a long period, government funding, particularly DARPA funding, has been essential as seed corn for the innovation that's come out of the Valley. Now here at this juncture, we've just gone through this period where there's been both targeted government spending in the Valley, things like DUI, I guess that you're becoming an incubator for DARPA.
Right, we have accelerators. Yep.
We have these large macro events like the CHIPS Act driving a particular industry. Where are we now? I mean, both at SRI, I know X doesn't rely very much on government funding, but
no, though actually DUI is
part of it?
Is something that we work with, and we've had some really good experiences with them. And so, like, for example, we're doing work with the National Guard and FEMA, as an example, because of DUI.
But step back and talk about the relationship.
Sorry, you said DUI. It's DIU, just to be clear.
I'm sorry, did I say DUI?
It's DIU. It's DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit.
Experimental. It was experimental. It's no longer experimental. Yes.
You're just seeing if they were listening.
So now push this forward, and we have a new administration. Can Silicon Valley stand on its 2 feet without government at this point, or will the government continue to play a role?
Well, I think DARPA and organizations like DARPA are critical because they are one of the few places you can take risk. They're ones who can enable other organizations to get into areas they might not otherwise, that may not fit their sort of core, product strategy. And you can explore that. And it really has infused SRI's culture. In fact, it's kind of interesting because, as you know, Sarnoff became part of SRI in 1987. Well, a researcher at Sarnoff named George Hellmeyer is the one who went to DARPA in the 70s, right, who really articulated how you think about what's a compelling idea that can change the world. In fact, it's codified on DARPA's website. That basically talks about how's your idea compelling, why does it matter, who's going to care, how's it compare, and then how will you know if you're successful? And I think that whole mindset has driven how we have worked in many organizations. So I think it's key. It's key for a country like ours to have that investment in fundamental research and the things that are creating risk. And in fact, you see that success being modeled in many DARPA-like organizations, IARPA, ARPA-E, ARPA-H, and many countries around the world are trying to figure out how do you catalyze that same culture.
And X partnerships,
Well, I think it would be mean-spirited not to shout out to DARPA. Like, we have been a massive beneficiary, often very indirectly, of DARPA's work. So like the self-driving car work that sort of like took root at X and became Waymo, like obviously there was decades that was largely funded by DARPA before it ever touched us. And that's not the only one where, drones, robotics, other things, we've never taken a penny from DARPA, but I could trace back lots of things we do and see that a lot of the early work was funded by other groups too. ARPA-E is something that we can trace back our roots to. So I would say it's more like basic science around the world is important seed corn. Does it have to be DARPA that's funding that basic science? No. But I think all of Silicon Valley, including both of our organizations, would be less good off if there wasn't someone else who was working on the basic science, because neither of our groups really are pure basic science.
Yeah, and I think that, if you think about GPS we all rely on, you'd never have it without fundamental research on atomic clocks and precision there, right? So then there's that need for that fundamental research largely done in universities, but you don't get that acceleration and that movement from invention to impact that is innovation without an organization like DARPA and others and companies driving that. And I think that's the key catalyst that sets us apart as a country in many ways.
Okay. One more aspect of sort of the basic landscape that will shape the world going forward. I wanted to ask you both about semiconductor scaling. I think there's a rich debate about whether we're still scaling, but one of the things that, the Valley lived off of Moore's Law in many ways. In some ways, it was a free ride for decades, going back into the early 60s. I think it's the case that the per-cost transistor cost of silicon stopped falling in 2014, 2015. And it's probably gone a little bit in the other direction. It's certainly not falling exponentially. How has that changed the terrain? We can talk about whether we're going to continue scaling in the future, but I'm just talking about this pause that we've been in for maybe a half decade or longer, in terms of, once it fell exponentially.
I would agree about the free ride part. I've seen a lot of algorithm work, some in academia and some in industry, where if you really look, almost all of the benefits just came from the fact that there was just massive additional compute flooding onto the scene every year. And that's where almost all the benefit was really coming from. That said, I would say Moore's Law is actually one of many pieces. So look how fast the world is changing now, how fast we're trying to add compute to the world, how much the use of AI on that compute is changing what we're getting per flop that we're doing. And flop isn't even the right term anymore, because we're doing 4-bit integer multiplications with an increasing amount of the sort of GPUs and TPUs and things like that to do inference, on these foundation models. So, and now where's the energy coming from, and sort of how the grid is working is all becoming part of this. So I'm not saying Moore's Law is not important, but I think this is sort of a multi-dimensional thing where there's several exponentials at work.
Could there be a second order effect where cost is still falling, even though it's not falling in silicon? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think this also speaks to, you think about innovation, how important constraints are. You would think it's sort of counter, but constraints actually drive innovation. And so if you think about that, what you're referring to, so you have Moore's Law in that number of transistors on a chip sort of flattening out, though there's still more room. But the major advances recently in GPUs, a wonderful talk by the chief scientist in NVIDIA, in terms of a lot of that is not about putting more transistors or components, it's about architecture. So what Astro was just saying, now you've moved from basically floating point to integer, from integer with multi-digits to less, right? And as you do that work with architecture and then also change algorithms, a lot of the advances have come not from the traditional way we think about advances, but in computer architecture and computing that gives 1,000-fold increase. And so I think what's interesting is you bump up against one barrier and then you say, I have a way around that.
Right. And some of the problems and solutions that are coming online today just would have made no sense 10 or 20 years ago. So right now, huge workloads are being moved around the world at the speed of light to get where the sun is, because that's where the cheap energy is. And can you imagine trying to explain that to somebody 20 years ago?
I did learn about that a long time ago when I think it was Intel had labs around the world and they moved the compute process to where people were working. because the workforce was around at different times, but the sunlight makes a lot more sense.
Of course, now we need land because we're using inference so much on these amazing AI clusters that you need the energy, you need the land, and you need to expand that even while people are trying to reduce the energy demand from these clusters.
So one of the things that Jensen Huang has said is the valley swarms. We pick targets, and there's lots of losers, but they're big winners. Clearly, the current swarm is AI. I think there's been an effort to rename this as Cerebral Valley. I don't know if you've seen that, but that seems very current. So there's even an active discussion about when artificial general intelligence will arrive. And there's some in the Valley who think it's quite near term. I wanted to ask you both, I guess we need to define terms, if we could sort of come to some agreement on what AGI might mean, and then is it in fact near term?
Let's get on to that topic, but just on the swarm point.
Yeah.
You're right. A lot of Silicon Valley does swarm. A lot of value is created in that swarming, which is why it happens. I would like to think that both of our organizations are not focused on the swarming of the moment. Yeah. Our jobs, both of our jobs, is to do things now that will cause swarming in 10 to 15 years. Okay. And so,
fair enough.
We're in a different part of the swarm. We're like the seed crystals that get created that later cause. In fact, Google Brain, which is one of the things that sort of kicked off the modern explosion in this particular, the foundation models, transformers came from Google Brain, which originally started at X. But that was now 13, 14 years ago. So we're off doing very different things. And I'm excited that that's happening, but that's we're on to something else. Okay. But on AGI, I'm not sure that we're going to get a single answer on that. And some people get religious or philosophical in a way that I think is just like a rabbit hole you'll never see the other side of. One of the closest I can get to that I think is somewhat practical is at what point might artificial intelligence get to the place where it is making itself better faster than we can help make it better?
Okay. That sounds suspiciously like the singularity.
That's a testable. The singularity also tends to come with some pseudo-religious fervor that I'm trying to stay away from. But I think that the way I just described it, yes, which is somewhat like the singularity, is a somewhat testable hypothesis.
Yeah. Does SRI have a view on AGI? And
I don't know. Generally, it gets to then how would you define it, right? So that's the hard part. But I think it's almost like quantum supremacy, right? When does quantum computing beat classical or even
I'll ask you.
Right?
Sure.
So
go on.
You have all those, but I think part of it is you can have a pragmatic view. Is it useful? How can it, and because a lot of things that we do today, before we would have thought we couldn't have done that way, right? So you think about, I think it's 1946, right? Dick Tracy video watch, right? So now I'm wearing one. But, and then I'm waiting for my Jetson car and the Rosie the robot, to be able to do those things. And so this continues to evolve. I think I like the point that Astro is making about in both our roles, we're seeking to create the seed for the next while being involved in the swarm to understand it, to put guardrails around it, things of that fashion. So what's after LLMs? Neurosymbolic and things of that fashion. What about sensing and quantum? But with the AGI, I think we're going to continue to be blown away by what these tools can do. And I find myself sort of on both sides of the fence. Every day myself experiencing the brittleness or where they can be wrong. But then I had one of our mathematician researchers come to my office and said, Dave, I'm out of a job. He goes, I just solved the problem it took me 2 years to do before in a matter of a week. But then he said, now with that tool, I can apply it on a class of problems I could never touch before. Mm-hmm. So then I think it'll have greater capability. So you think, okay, it's moving toward where we were, but we're going to move ahead if we harness it and use it. So, it's like a race in a way.
Astro?
I would also say that we use the word intelligence as though it was like a monolithic dimension. And we have this problem in other areas too, where we're just sort of lip lazy. We say that airplanes fly and balloons fly and dragonflies fly. We mean they're up in the air in a somewhat capable way. But what really counts as flying and the sort of different aspects of their flight are so ridiculously different. Like dragonflies can stop within one body length when they're going, at many body lengths per second. If you tried to do that with a 747, it would literally disintegrate, right? And yet, there's other good things about a 747. And this has been true. Computers have been superhuman on some dimensions for decades.
So this is a linguistic question in some ways. I don't think many people know this, but while he was preparing for the Dartmouth Summer Project, John McCarthy came up with the term artificial intelligence. If you go to his archive, the reason he picked artificial intelligence is because he really disliked this guy, Norbert Wiener. And Norbert Wiener had coined the term cybernetics. I actually think cybernetics would have been a much better term and would have kept us out of this morass we've gotten into with artificial intelligence. But while we're on the subject, in 1997, you wrote a novel called Exegesis. It dealt with a conversation between, I guess, a researcher and an AI, all textual back and forth. What did you get right and what did you get wrong? What kind of marks do you give yourself? I'm interested in this because of the challenges of prediction over a long period of time.
Well, I mean, in 97, I had, us reaching sort of semi or pseudo consciousness, a system like, you can now go to something like Gemini and just talk to and have like a reasonable Turing testy conversation with it. I had that happening in 2000 at the turning of the millennia, because the turning of the millennia seemed like, a nice way to do it, not particularly because I thought it was going to happen 3 years later. So I was obviously off by 22 years, sort of depending on how you count.
What about the mechanism? Did you think it was going to be natural language understanding, or did you think about transformers?
Well, one of the things that I think I got right, so the text of the title is exegesis. Exegesis means the interpretation of a text. And one of the subjects of the novel is, imagine what it would feel like if you had to learn about the whole world and all you got was ones and zeros. You didn't get to smell anything. You couldn't physically manipulate anything. All you got was ones and zeros. That training, you might get good enough that you could talk to people, and you might still deeply not understand what the world was. And so some of the brittleness that we experience when we use these foundation models, where they seem superhuman in some ways and yet still frustrating, and like they don't really get the basic stuff. It's like, how can you write a whole novel in a second, but I ask you the number of rectangles in a picture and you get the number wrong with great confidence? That's part of what I was exploring. So I think that's one that I sort of got right. I also think one of the subjects of the book was essentially using this AI as a metaphor for technology. We're developing a more and more relationship-like relationship with technology. And we need to be very careful, because if we approach any relationship with fear and suspicion and a kind of xenophobia, the person on the other side is going to react poorly to us. And yet that's exactly how we're reacting, most of society, to science in general, to technology more specifically, and to AI in particular. And I worry that that's a feedback cycle that society hasn't appreciated, that how we treat technology is going to shape what the technology becomes and how it sort of plays out in our society.
Okay. David, you guys are working on I think you call it trustworthy AI. Does this play into this question?
Very much so. And because a range of work in terms of explainability, how do you know how it got to that answer? Bringing sort of the best computer science informal methods to put boundaries on it so it only reasons in a certain way. Ways to think about codifying physics so it won't come to an answer that violates fundamental laws of physics, or a whole host of things like that. And then also things related to cybersecurity. It's an area that SRI has worked in for a long time. And now that you have these AI systems, you've sort of expanded the attack surface so they can be used for cyber warfare. They can also, you think about someone re-engineering your own system. And so you're saying, how do you protect that? But I think a lot of our thinking around this is, how do we use it with people? I think it's been sort of the heart of SRI from the beginning. Doug Engelbart, wasn't about, even though SRI invented the mouse and many other things like that, it wasn't about the peripheral. It was about, how do we enable people to use the power of computing to solve really important problems. Yeah. And this collaborative nature of human machine has been at the heart of that. And I think that's key. And also a lot of the things we celebrate in AI was made possible because someone figured out how to get enough humans to label the data that it could be trained on. In fact, my mom was so excited because I sent her this article. The National Archives is looking for people who know how to read cursive, which is a lost art, because machine learning still fails on cursive. So when you're looking at all these historical documents, they actually need people. So if any of you remember how to write in cursive, you may actually have a role. It's kind of fun in your spare time. And it's sort of, all these things still have interesting barriers there. But I think the main point is thinking about, like Astro was saying, not viewing it as a threat, though we can address that with putting guardrails around it, but also thinking of it about an amazing capability that we now can harness.
Yeah, I'm still interested in, I mean, your effort to predict something in the form of a science fiction novel. It was two SRI researchers, Tom Gruber and Adam Chyer, who were the technical inventors of Siri, and they both set out to do Siri because they wanted to build something called Knowledge Navigator, which began as an Apple Vision video in, I think it was 1997 too, actually. It was, no, it was 1987. It was a decade before. What about the role of science fiction as a driving function for which direction the Valley might go next?
I just, weird shout out to Star Trek, but I'm actually not like a super techie. I mean, I like Star Trek, but there was this period from the mid 50s to maybe the mid 70s where there was a hopefulness in science fiction. It wasn't all hopeful, but there was a lot of hopefulness in it. Star Trek was probably the sort of prime example of that. And technologists can think for themselves. We all can think for ourselves. And yet, I think when storytellers create visions of the future, we do tend to sort of gravitate there and we get inspired by and I think list in the direction of those stories. And it makes me sad that particularly for the last 20, 30 years, most science fiction has been dystopian. And I've written two novels. One of them was science fiction, so I guess I should participate more too. But I wish there was more positive storytelling around science and technology in the form of science fiction to inspire scientists and technologists and entrepreneurs to make those visions of the future, because you're kind of, in a cheap way, running these thought experiments about how would this play out in society, which is one of the big upsides and one of the big dangers of technology. And this is a really safe way to find out, is by running the thought experiment, by running a novel.
And I think, both of our organizations certainly characterized by looking for the big ideas. There's a lot of important innovation that's incremental. We're about what changes fundamentally how one thinks about the world. And I think science fiction has a wonderful role in envisioning what's possible. Also, sometimes it can make our job hard because it seems like people think it's already done. And you show them something, say, oh, wait, I thought I already saw that in the movie. I already read it in the book, right? But I was emailing one of our physics researchers today because there's some major advances with regard to quantum entanglement. And being able to send basically information, in a sense, even though you're not beaming information, faster than the speed of light, because you're able to perturb entangled photons, measure one, and know what's happening in another place. And so and it was referred to as teleportation. And I thought, well, Star Trek got people thinking about those kinds of things, right? So we're beginning to realize some of the early elements of that today. Yeah. Or like the Klingon cloaking device, right? And how do you provide stealth, not only from different types of portions of the radio magnetic spectrum, but also from visible light as well.
I absolutely agree with you on dystopian science fiction. I grew up as part of the Asimov-Heinlein generation. I got to InfoWorld in 1981, and reading cyberpunk science fiction, I realized that life was imitating art. The cyberpunk writers were ahead of the hackers, and you're completely right. So let's step beyond AI. I mean, we could talk about AI forever. Both of you guys run labs that do things beyond artificial intelligence. What's exciting and what should people know about that's going on in your labs, respectively? Pick one thing that is.
Well, here's my prediction. I think that humanity will look back on the 21st century and think of this century as being defined at least as much by the century, we came to program life as by artificial intelligence. We are just now moving from biology as a science to biology as an engineering discipline. We can already change, if you go into a bacteria cell, something like yeast or E. coli, you can change the code, you can change what it does, but we don't quite yet know what's going to happen when you change it. As soon as we can dial in, knowing what's going to change, it's like the equivalent of having a compiler, right? Then all of a sudden, I think we're going to start using these self-replicating carbon negative machines that biology has developed for us over billions of years. We're going to do a lot of really cool stuff with them. So synthetic genomics, that's my prediction.
And maybe a complementary part is what we're doing with our own biology. So if you think about it, when we have disease and things like that, we basically treat it and we do it brute force. The same for everybody. With what we understand today about people and genomics, proteomics, and things that fashion, we can tailor treatment and even cures specific to the individual. So again, now we can deliver active ingredients and drugs to the right cell in the right body at the right time, at the right dosage, so it can have the effect you want without all the negative parts. And I think this will fundamentally change in our century as we think about how medicine is delivered, or even the sensing of it, all the things that you have to connect up to people, things we can even sense from outside the body, will be very powerful as we now develop quantum sensors that leverage quantum effects that are able to measure things orders of magnitude less than what conventional sensors today can. And so I think, but we don't know for sure where this will go. I think this is one of the fun things about innovation. You're motivated by a particular direction, you have an idea, but it's that twist that you don't realize that comes later.
So we're programming life. Do we need guardrails? Mark Andreessen showed up at HAI about 3 months ago, and I would call it an impassioned rant against what he called the precautionary principle. What do you think?
I think that there are versions of working on life that need some kinds of guardrails and others that don't. So I'll give you an example. We have, in the past, worked on tuning seeds so that you can have plants that do what you want. We were actually a lot more careful there. Like, you have to spend a lot of energy like making sure that the yeast is going to be okay. The yeast is not going to come crawling across the floor and get you. Whereas like the plants are actually really good at recreating themselves. So fundamentally, I think, yes, you have to be thoughtful, and the amount and ways you have to be thoughtful actually need to be tuned to the thing that you're working on. So it's actually, using the example I just did, like plants is something where we were a lot more careful and differently careful than we were with the yeast.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think absolutely, but it doesn't have to slow down the innovation. I mean, just think about X-rays. And there was a period of time when X-rays were used to measure in terms of pregnant women without understanding the impact on the life inside. Or how about microplastics? Right? Or forever plastics and things like that. There's so many things like that at the time we were developing the technology, we could not envision. Now what we're developing is much more complex. And so, but the point is not to do it. The point is to be thoughtful about it, to put in the right controls, visibility around it, and to move at the right pace with these things.
So as rapidly as AI has been moving forward, robotics has moved, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I can go out in the street and a robot car goes by me. That is completely amazing. For good or ill, it's completely amazing. But going to you guys recently closed down your everyday robotics project, and you know, I think it's the case. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It actually merged with Google Robotics. So those robots are alive and well. They're actually on the same floor of our building still. Okay, it's just it became part. It and Google Robotics merged.
Forgotten, but gone. Okay. That said, it's, I think, been 23 years since the introduction of the Roomba, and I believe it's still the only commercially widely available mobile home robot. Is that going to change? I mean, we start with Shaky in 1960, what year for SRI?
Okay, someone in the room will know.
I think 68.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
It was earlier in 68. Anyway.
Yeah, but I think that this is sort of the point about the difficulty of the cyber and the physical and that intersection. If you're just dealing with knowledge systems, playing the games or retrieving information, you can do that quickly. When you get to the physical, it's hard because then you could have a sensor break, and that affects what you're able to do with that whole system. And I think this is one where you have to work that together with the modeling, the simulation, the thinking about the applications of it, even the vehicles and all that they can do today. You put them in an unknown environment, snowy road, no roads, no markers. And then, but it's the human machine, I think, that also provides an opportunity, because in that case, it's also the handoff problem's hard. If you're working a crossword puzzle, all of a sudden your car says, I don't know what to do, take over. That's where sometimes full autonomy is better. But if you think about, something like surgery and things of the fashion, when you think about what's spun out with intuitive surgical, that's not fully robotic nor fully the person, but it's the two together. And it's this seamlessness. If we can get more of that seamlessness of these autonomous and robotic type tools, enabling people to do more, I think that's where we're going to get a lot of advance sooner in the physical world.
I would say, just like self-driving cars sort of seem to take forever, and then all of a sudden, wow, they're here, robots will be like that too. They're sort of a decade behind the self-driving cars, but they're coming, and it's going to be really good and important for humanity. They're a lever for our bodies, just like computers are a lever for our minds. Mm-hmm. If I could go on a tiny rant, though, can we stop with the legs? This is like the saddest imagination fail I can imagine. And I've had these arguments over and over again where people say that they want to work on legs on the robots. And I say, look, crazy idea. If we can get them to be super useful, because our answer is always, how do they go up the stairs? To which I've always said, let's say, for argument's sake, that we have robots that are wildly productive on the first floor. And then all we have to do is get them to the second floor. There's 50 ways we can figure out how to do that. And maybe legs is one of them. But since we're nowhere close to them being useful, productive, cost efficient on the first floor, that's just not useful. That's just showmanship, but that's not actually going to take us anywhere.
David, would your roboticist
end rants, sorry.
Would your roboticist agree?
I'll give you legs, give me hands. The hard part is the gripping and things like that, and the manipulation and so on, and that would be great. But I think it's the idea of have each do what it's good at, right? Of course, it's if you're trying to relate to a robot, and have it, sort of helping in terms of an assistant around the house or a companion of some sort in terms of being able to help in a society, then maybe looking more like us can help or sounding more like us. But yeah, I think there are problems we make too hard because it's not needed, but others that certainly distinguish us in what we're able to do.
In the Everyday Robot Project, a lot of what we were trying to get our robots to be useful, and they, in fact, were to actually probably still are servicing a bunch of Google buildings. But a lot of what we were exploring was also what it's going to be like to be around the robots and to make that so that it could be a positive part of humanity. Ultimately, that's why are we doing this if it's not going to be really good for humanity? And there were little things have it, instead of just going down the hallway and if it would turn and look at you, and that moment where you make eye contact, that helped a little bit. But when it turned and looked at you and it went, just the nod, I see you, that felt so good. There's shoulders just went down.
There's not a robotic uncanny valley or something?
Nope. No, if you do it right, that one just felt good. It felt oh, it sees me. If the LiDAR is looking in front of it, and so it's going this way, but the head is over here, that's uncanny valley. Even if you intellectually know that the LiDAR from its neck is looking forward, you're just dude, you don't know where you're going. Get your head focused on where you're going. I can pick this up without looking at it. Yeah. But that's weird, right? Yeah. You want me to look at this because that's just normal. So helping the robots to learn how to use body language to signal to you, I'm safe to be around, I see you, here's some of my intentions. we do this with each other unconsciously, and getting robots to do that might not be the sexy stuff, but it's, I think, absolutely critical to robots ending up having a great part in their sort of play here.
Aren't you doing that with your robot cars too? Don't they have
Yes.
some kind of...
The body language for the cars turned out to be a really interesting problem. It wasn't the first thing we worked on, but when you're trying to like nudge your way into like a merge, you're kind of like shimmying. You're sort of like saying like, I'm going now. Can y'all like leave some space for me? And figuring out how to express yourself as a car with the little subtle movements you have so that other drivers can understand your intentions. Yeah. That turned out to be quite important for Waymo.
And I think that it sort of adds to the point I was making earlier, the importance of the human machine, because if you're on a road and a self-driving car comes by you, first, if it's a driver in the car, you're walking your dog. If it starts to move around you, you know they've seen you, right? If they don't, you think they're texting and driving and they're not paying attention. Now, if an autonomous car goes by, it could be perfectly fine going within 2 feet of you, but you don't know that it knows you're there, right? And so I think that connection is key. And I think that's, but I think robotics are actually in factories in a big way, right? So I think the big difference is automation in that we build so much, but you have people, you keep people away from them.
Yeah.
And when you can bring them together. So when you think about moving goods and material in assembly, so your model, the Roomba, that's happening today. What's interesting, some of the things we're working on with some of the companies in Japan particularly, is how do you do it in an uncontrolled environment, like construction? How do you think about bringing that same capability you could bring on a factory floor where you know exactly where everything is stored, where it's going to, what the lanes are, where every day and every hour things are changing. And I think this is where the challenges of situational awareness, being able to adapt, contingency management, and thinking about how people see you is really key. And I think once we begin to solve some of those and then have the need for it, right? Because today people think about robotics for things that are dull, dirty, dangerous, things that fashion, the classic. But if it can be truly a helper and a partner to each do, and even, you know, the interesting question, if you're building something, would you accept directions from the robot? You hold this piece for me because I can't grip it. Or, you know, can you use your leg because I don't have a leg? Things like that. Right?
I think about it this way. Like people talk about how maybe we'll send robots in to help elderly people. That you drop something on the floor, you're having a hard time picking it up, I'll pick it up for you. Okay, maybe. We're going to be great, like with the robots. When the robot's there and you're having a hard time picking it up, it could pick it up for you, but it's like, I think you can do it. Go ahead, give it a try.
Your coach.
Because it knows that you'll feel better about yourself. You'll actually stay healthier if you keep picking it up. Like, so I think that there are several layers above the, like, can it pick it up for you or what mechanically can do, and sort of like how it can really be in flow with us as individuals and as a species.
I really want to ask you, both of your organizations are working on quantum computing problems. I want to ask two simple questions. Will there be commercially useful quantum computers? And second question is when? Do either of you have answers?
First, Google is working on quantum, the actual quantum computers themselves. X has actually taken several rounds at programming the computers, quantum sensing, quantum navigation, quantum networking, but not the actual computers themselves. So we've had a lot of experience in this, but a lot of that experience has now been spun off as a company called Sandbox AQ.
Which is a sensor company?
Among other things, yes. Actually, the thing, I'm an advisor to the business, and I spend the most time talking with them about their quantum sensing. But my take on it is, when you look at the ways people are currently proving quantum supremacy, they're not useful things.
No.
And I think it's a bit of a giveaway. I'm hopeful that we're going to end up with quantum computers being how we do an incredible amount of thinking for humanity. But I think that there's some algorithmic breakthroughs between here and there. And I'm not sure it is just a matter of making the qubits and getting them entangled, or even getting the error correction. I think there's some real algorithm breakthroughs that we're going to need before quantum computers are really useful.
Yeah, and so we're not making computers either. Our work, though, relates to it, because you said, when will it get here? I'm not sure exactly. We're trying to answer, what would it be good for? because there's a lot of specialized problems that they're ideal for, but then you can't use them as a general computer. So we're thinking about how do you pose different problems for that? Also, how do you connect it up? When you think about this being effective and having enough qubits, you have to have the communication link be effective as well. And so quantum networking, key focus, quantum sensing, and then also the algorithms for what you might use. The other part that's interesting, and it's sort of the whole point earlier we're talking about, let's not just be in the swarm, let's create the next one, is we're asking, well, what other computer architectures beyond classical and quantum computing might be useful in the future? So hybrid computing, classical and optical or other types, quantum and a classical. So there are other combinations and architectures of computing that we're exploring that may in fact prove a more viable path.
You raised one point about the recent advances in quantum communications. I'm a little behind reading the papers, but I always thought we would never have quantum networks that would offer us instantaneous communication. Let's forget about teleportation. Are there changes in that model? I was trying to read those articles and I didn't get the answer out of it.
I mean, for sure, one-time pads have been shown. So I think that was what you're talking about, where you can have two things that are at a distance. You can't exactly send information, but if you can guarantee that if you look at the spin of some particle and it turns out it's this spin, and so you can then force arbitrarily far in the distance, just by having seen that spin, that spin has to be the opposite.
So I know someone looked at it.
So
Yes,
so
that's
those kind of
security.
one-time pads at a distance, which is a kind of communication, that's been physically demonstrated. That's real over multiple kilometers.
Yeah. But very useful in terms of when you're thinking about securing networks,
Yeah.
right? How do you know that no one has actually broken through and seen the chat?
Can I ask one more question before we turn it over to the?
You may.
Okay. I just want to get your, both of you are involved in energy storage. I think X is doing stuff at scale, not small batteries, but big batteries. Is that correct? Or
I mean, we've worked from literally batteries on contact lenses to grid scale batteries. But I think the grid scale battery is the one you're thinking about that spun out from X a number of years ago. It's called Malta. They're building I really don't understand why, but they're building one in Canada, which is a gigawatt hour battery, and then one in Florida, which is 100 megawatt battery, and why one is measured in power and one is measured in capacity, I don't understand. But they're building two big grid scale batteries right now.
And energy research storage research?
Yeah, so the capability with regard to fabrication, looking at how one can extrude different elements and things sort of underlying structure, but also more broadly, energy storage and conversion. So ranging from fuel cells to other technologies that one might use to convert into electricity, store it, or like we were talking about in the hallway earlier, what one might do with regard to basically pyrolyzing methane in order to go directly into carbon and then the hydrogen as a fuel, and then maybe even using that to make methanol. So there are a lot of really interesting ideas in terms of the whole energy space and potential hydrogen economy and things of that fashion.
Yeah, in fact, the thing I was talking about, I'm agreeing with you, is those are heat batteries. Those are not chemical batteries. Those are heat batteries that I was describing.
Right. Okay. I have a million more questions, but at this point, we'll bring the audience in. Mike,
Thank you. Yeah, we have a million great questions here as well, and I hope it's okay with everyone if we stay a little bit longer than we anticipated before the reception. I'll start with this one is, if there is a lineage from well-funded basic science into each of your respected organizations, how far are the output technologies from positively impacting the global South relative to staying at the forefront of Silicon Valley?
Can you repeat that last part? How far?
Sure. How far are the output technologies, the inventions, from positively impacting the global South relative to staying in Silicon Valley?
Let me give you an example. I mean, sometimes like self-driving cars, it will happen. It is happening here first. But here's a counterexample. We have made something. It's a box about this big. You strap it to a pole, plug the internet in. It shines a laser up to 20 kilometers. You have to have another one of these boxes. They have to be able to see each other. But if they can see each other, in 1 hour, you can get a fiber optic cable through the sky without the cable. So, less than 1,000th the cost, probably less than a 10,000th the cost of trenching the fiber. In 1 hour, you can have 20 gigabits per second. Now, we're getting 99% uptime. But in a lot of the developed world, they just weren't ready to believe that, and they just wanted to pretend that they had 3 nines of reliability when everyone here in Palo Alto knows you don't have 3 nines of reliability in your homes. But they just weren't ready to hear that 2 nines of reliability might be enough. So we went to the global south first. And so we're now putting these out every single day. They're in like 15 countries. And now we're starting, in the United States, in Europe, but we started in Africa and in India and the Caribbean and places that were just more ready for it. So that's an example where a technology, I know there's a ton of goodness to be had and a ton of money to be made in the developed world, and yet the global south was the right place for us to start.
So the last part was about the
Yeah, it's about the speed at which from creation to delivery, and particularly in having global impact in parts of the developing world.
Okay. Yeah, so certainly Siri, we talked about, right? So that was a big DARPA program, cognitive assistant that learns and organizes, that became one that was thinking about how do you bring AI, actually is the thought, with regard to helping people with tasks. And then that, I'm sure everybody in the room, or many of you, if I said, hey, Siri, your phone would line up. And then more recently launched a company, Ninja Tech, that's also doing similar things. I think the nice thing when you think about the question, the investment from government, is that, and this is what I was saying earlier, it takes often a different path. So one of the pieces of work SRI had been funded to do for the National Science Foundation, it's sort of the basic research, study atmospheric phenomenon. As researchers were studying atmospheric phenomenon, they realized there was noise in their signal. There was clutter. They're trying to get rid of it. So they tried to get rid of it to get more precise measurement of the atmospheric phenomenon. But in the Silicon Valley very much story, they soon realized the noise was the signal, because the noise was coming from all the satellites and space debris. So now we spun out in 2015 a company, Leo Labs, that's mapping low Earth orbit, because now everyone that's trying to do business in space and put things in low Earth orbit needs to know what else is up there, right? From not only satellites are there, space debris, junk, and where it's headed. And so this is one where that fundamental work on fundamental science led in a different twist to something practical with regard to what now is exploding in our world in terms of putting assets into space low Earth orbit.
As the speed of technological innovation accelerates, it increasingly outstrips the speed of society, for example, policy and culture. How should we be thinking about this? What are the implications for human systems when that continues to happen?
I'm seriously worried about this. I think the reality is technology is going to continue to speed up. It just is what it is. We can argue till the cows come home about whether that's a good thing or bad thing, but it will continue to speed up, not just be fast, but continue to get faster. And human society, while it is very slowly improving its rate of adaptation, is falling behind relative to technology. And that is leaving people feeling scared, confused, and a real loss of control. And that is then translating into some pretty bad behaviors, I would argue, in this country and around the world because of those feelings. And we need to find a way to get back in front of that. And I don't think we're going to change the rate at which technology is changing. So we need to find a way to help society pick up the pace at which it adapts. I don't know how to do that, but I am worried.
Yeah, I think this is the timescale problem, and one in which it's hard to move fast enough on the policy side, because that tends to be bureaucratic, whereas the other is. But I think this is where technology can also help if we use it. And what I mean by that, for example, all the challenges with deepfakes and the things that move quickly in that space and how you think about how you regulate it, we can also use the technology to identify it and also to begin countering it. And I think for much of the technology that we'll be developing, we're going to need to think about the counter at the same time for the uses that aren't appropriate.
Let me just add that, where this is coming home most quickly, I think, is in the Ukraine-Russian war, where I think the pace of drone autonomous systems is outpacing. We had an interesting debate about autonomous weapons, and now the reality of the situation is that there will shortly, or there already are, autonomous weapons that make killing decisions, and we have lost the ability to. I worry tremendously about that.
When we think about all these technological advances and we think about the next generation, our children and grandchildren, What should we be thinking about in terms of their education and the future of their workplace?
No, I think that's great. When I think about SRI Parc and historically having a key role in inventing the future of the office that we live today, thinking about how education will change. And I think as we've looked at it, certainly it's a tool where people can teach themselves, but this is what my point earlier about human machine collaboration. You don't want to get the teacher out of the classroom, but you want to augment that teacher to be more effective and to be able to do more that's value add. And so maybe the things that are more routine, you can use some of these tools for. And I think what's nice is for kids, I have 7 grandkids now, is it's so seamless for them. They adapt to it. It's natural, even as a 1 or 2 year old, they can seamlessly move on a touchscreen. But I think it's one where we have to think about how it fundamentally changes, but makes better how we can deliver education as opposed to replacing what we have today. Yeah.
I have 4 kids, and I've been telling them for a long time that I think that there are 3 things that are most important for them to sort of get under their belts. Being learning, like being a lifelong learner, being curious, just having fun doing that first thing, and being able to make the technologies of the future as they come online tools for those first 2 things. Find ways to have the technologies that are present themselves to you throughout your life, supercharge your ability to learn and the fun you can have being curious about the world rather than feeling threatened by those things as they come online. That's what I've been telling my kids.
Yeah, and to that I've added with my staff and others, and know when the answer is right. Because too often people will make a mistake on a calculator, have no idea that what they put in was wrong, wait for a computer program to give them an answer. And so that, we've risked the ability to estimate and have intuition, to have a sense whether things are, and as we have more and more autonomous systems and more tools, we can't lose that because it'll be really easy to just accept something coming out of a machine.
So there's 3 questions on 25-year horizons. So I'll ask all 3 of them, and we have time probably for, answer as many as you like. And then John, if you want to have the last question. What's next for space in the Valley? Do you believe we will all have a personal humanoid robot in the future? And with all of the smart, brilliant people in our various organizations, can we come up with a cure for cancer in 25 years?
We'll pick one.
I mean, super fast, I would say we don't spend a lot of time on space. I'm supportive of people who want to do that, but I'm not sure that's the best way to help humanity, so we're focused in other areas. I'm not sure that each of us will have a robot. I think it's like, how many computers do you have? You have like hundreds of computers and you don't have names for all of them. I think there will be a lot of robots around us. I'm not sure the right way to think of it is like one Rosie the robot who follows you around like a butler. And cancer, I predict we're going to continue to see it move from a deadly disease to a chronic disease. Some aspects of it, you really will get cured. Biology is a pretty complicated place, and cancer in particular is pernicious because it's part of you that's malfunctioning. I don't think we're just going to have this snap where all of a sudden cancer goes away.
Yeah, I think with regard to space, really critical for our understanding of our own planet. I love an initiative they have at Stanford they call Taking the Pulse of the Planet. And when we realize all the things we have to understand about our planet, many of those things are easier to measure looking down. And I think that's going to be really key, along with communication, all the other things everyone already knows about. I think with regard to a robot, be fun. But I think the other part that really speaks back to Mark Weiser here from Parc Days and ubiquitous computing is in many ways we have that all around us today, right? Maybe not the physical instantiation, but we have all this autonomous, intelligent systems around us that we can talk to, interact with. And I think it's maybe disaggregated, maybe not just a single one. And I think with regard to cancer, there might be some, not all, but some. But I think one of the things we'll be able to do, we're working on, is enabling the body to be able to unleash its amazing immune system on those things that today are hidden from it. And so what we're able to do to, as we say, turn cold tumors hot and things of that fashion, I think you're going to see a lot of advances there. We're not only in the treatment of it, but also enabling the body to attack and recognize. In fact, one of the cool things, if you say 25 years from now, what might we have? We're working on it now, is that you'd have an in-home test for 100 different cancers. That you could have a device at home that you could make a measurement with your doctor so you don't get spooked, to be able to identify that, right? That'd be huge. And because then ability to deal with that earlier.
So a last question about, I guess, sustainability of Silicon Valley. When I moved back here as a young reporter to Palo Alto in 1970, I was able to rent a room in a house in Professorville for $50 a month. Eric Schmidt, when I was talking to him when SRI acquired Parc, one of the things he worried most is about the cost of living in Silicon Valley and the challenge because you need young researchers. I was wondering if you guys have thoughts about the cost of Silicon Valley and the question of inventing the future.
It is expensive. It was expensive when I was a grad student in the 80s. My whole student stipend as a grad student just paid for rent. Now, had I had a house, in fact, I looked at this later, so I should convince my family to help me buy a house. You know how much that house would be worth now, right? But it is a problem. And in fact, our campus in Menlo Park, we're trying to see how we can convert some and make it available for more affordable housing. But I also think it's one where it's such a dynamic ecosystem that people figure that out. We have so many postdocs and others coming to be here. And I think the energy and the dynamism of the Valley is going to be such a magnet that it will still be bringing people in.
I mean, I agree that I don't think even crazy expensive as it is, it's not going to torpedo the Valley. Also, this is a totally solvable problem. Humanity in general, the United States specifically, California even more specifically, and awesome, let's start in Silicon Valley. Building 500,000 places for people to live in sort of medium structures, sort of 3 to 5 stories tall, near what little public transportation we have in the United States. That, if we actually got organized as society, that is totally doable and would be completely affordable. This is not like it breaks a law of physics or this costs $10 trillion and there's no way to do it. We have to change some things, but this is a very solvable problem. So it gives me some hope that this is not one of these things that's sort of crazy over the horizon. It's actually, frankly, crazy that we haven't solved it yet.
Actually, I direct people to read there's a webpage done by a man by the name of Peter Calthorpe, who proposed the new urbanism. And he's taken that idea in the form of a grand boulevard that goes from San Jose to San Francisco. And you could put 500,000 housing units along that.
Exactly right.
And have a smart bus system instead of a smart car system.
Well, and that was the Menlo Park, our campus.
Yes,
right?
Right.
We're building multifamily housing, walking distance from Caltrain. And so we're doing our part.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, John Markoff, Astro Teller, and David Parekh. Thank you very much for your terrific conversation, as expected. Very much appreciated. The three of them are going to exit out that door, and I want to thank you. To do that, I want to thank you all again for coming. Once again, thank you to X, the Moonshot Factory, for your collaboration on this event. As they leave, I want to let you know that our next Parc Forum will be March 7th. And we will be hosting Eric Schmidt, the accomplished technologist, entrepreneur, philanthropist, former CEO and chair of Google, and the author of the new book, Genesis, Artificial Intelligence, Hope, and the Human Spirit, which I think will at least touch on many of the questions that we didn't get to today. So I hope you'll come back for that. A reminder, please, as you leave through those doors, to take your belongings with you. We will be locking the doors afterward. We hope you will continue the conversation, participate in our video upstairs at our reception, and